Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we do have some watches, warnings, and advisories out for the state. We'll start off by the Seward Peninsula, where through the Bering Strait area and down through St. Lawrence Island area, we do have a high wind warning that is in effect. We're going to see some northeast winds through the Bering Strait down towards the St. Lawrence Island area, with gusts getting up to as high as 60 miles per hour. That high wind warning is in effect now until 10 p.m. this evening. Out over the Alaska range, especially through the passes, we have multiple wind advisories out, anywhere from the upper Kuskokwim Valley through the eastern Alaska range. That's primarily for areas through the passes of the Alaska range, a little bit stronger in the eastern locations, up to as high as 65 mile per hour gusts. And then getting weaker as we move further to the west, where we get closer towards the upper Kuskokwim Valley, where speeds will be up to as high as 45 miles per hour. Out west, we're going to have that wind advisory lasting until 10 p.m. this evening. However, for the western and eastern portions of the Alaska range, we are expecting those advisories to last until noon on Monday. Then we can move a little bit further to the south. We'll stay out in the Mat-Su Valley areas in south central Alaska. We are going to get quite a bit of rain out over the Talkeetna Mountains area from this system coming up from the North Pacific. We are expecting 1 to 2 inches of rain in valleys near the Talkeetna Mountains. And then in the mountains themselves, we are expecting 2 to 4 inches. That's going to cause a lot of runoff into the rivers and streams around the Talkeetna Mountains, which is why we have the flood watches out. And those are in effect from Monday afternoon until Tuesday afternoon, watching for those river rises in those areas around the Talkeetna Mountains, those streams and rivers that are fed from the Talkeetna Mountains. Then down in the Bristol Bay area and the Alaska Peninsula, we have 2 more high wind warnings that are in effect from the remnants of old Typhoon Bobby that are moving into the Bering Sea, bringing some strong winds out of a south to southwesterly direction for these locations, up to as high as 75 miles per hour in both locations. However, in the Bristol Bay area, the strongest winds are going to be nearest to the Alaska Peninsula, so looking at locations south of King Salmon to see those gusts up to 75 miles per hour. For the Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at that warning lasting until 8 p.m. this evening, and then for the Bristol Bay area until 10 p.m. this evening. We also have a coastal flood advisory for the Bristol Bay area from Togiak down to Port Hayden. That is going to be in effect until 8 p.m. or starting from 8 p.m. this evening until 9 a.m. on Monday. And we are expecting water levels to rise 2 to 4 feet above high astronomical tide. Again, if you're in any of these locations and want to check for further updates, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates that we post for any of these locations or any others that are in the storm track with this system, bringing a lot of rain to a lot of areas and some strong winds with it. Moving on to our satellite imagery, we're going to watch our system moving into the eastern portions of the Bering Sea. We'll watch this again. We can watch the low center itself spinning in that, bringing those stronger winds into the Bristol Bay area. We have cloud cover extending in with the front through southwest Alaska, with the front extending down through Kodiak Island into the Gulf of Alaska and down back into the North Pacific. And we can also see as we look further to the east another wave pushing in towards the Panhandle area, bringing some rain to that location as well. So taking a look at our weather for the remainder of the day, we can look at our main system with that really deep 959 millibar low out over the eastern portions of the Bering Sea with those tight isobar packing that's going to allow for stronger winds in areas around the Alaska Peninsula up into southwest Alaska as well. Widespread rain through all of southwest Alaska up towards the Norton Sound area, down in through much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. However, on the backside of this system, we are expecting that to be a lot more showery. Then with the front pushing in through Kodiak Island and into the Gulf of Alaska, expecting rain in those locations as well, extending that rain up into the North Gulf Coast, where we are going to see areas of the eastern Kenai Peninsula and then eventually the North Gulf Coast. See quite a bit of rainfall from this system coming in with a strong moisture stream from the south. And we are going to see more rain out over the Panhandle area as well, with some lighter showers as we move further into the interior and up to the north in the Brooks Range. And there is still a chance for some afternoon and evening thunderstorms, very eastern portions of the interior. Then as we look into tonight, our main system's starting to weaken a little bit as it moves inland, 972 millibars as it moves over southwest Alaska, with that front extending into southern portions of the interior and out through the Gulf of Alaska, bringing widespread rain to the southern mainland and down into the Panhandle, with more rain expected out over the interior through the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline. Also along the Arctic coastline, a mixture with that rain and fog is expected, and some rain and fog down through the Norton Sound area and areas along much of the west coast around St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula. We're going to see some showers through much of the Bering Sea with that northerly flow, bringing some more showers into the central and eastern Aleutians, then rain back around as we get closer to the main portion of the low for the Alaska Peninsula. Looking into Monday, our low continuing to weaken, moving more into the interior, but still enough to bring some rain throughout all of the southern portions of the mainland, including southwest Alaska, down into the Alaska Peninsula as well, with that southwest flow off of the Gulf, bringing showers through the Gulf, and then a widespread rain for the Panhandle area all day on Monday. Going to see more rain up in the interior, especially out over those eastern locations, and then up through the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline, going to see more rain there. Down through the Bering Sea, continuing to see the northerly winds bringing some showers throughout the Bering and the eastern locations of the Aleutian Islands. Finally, on Tuesday, our low is weakened quite a bit, still remains over the interior portion of the state, but you can see with the isobars, not a lot of strong winds expected as we move through Tuesday, especially for the southern portions of the mainland, but still quite a bit of moisture throughout all of mainland Alaska, all along the west coast as well, down into the Alaska Peninsula, and continuing to see widespread rain showers for the Panhandle area on Tuesday. As we look further to the west out over the Bering Sea, we are going to see some showers coming in from that northerly direction down into the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Then high pressure building in from the west towards the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look now at our temperatures, starting off with the lows on Monday morning. Out over the Aleutian Islands, temperatures dropping down into the mid to upper 40s, in the 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, right around 50 degrees for the Bristol Bay area, and up through much of the YK Delta area as well. Getting into the 40s as we move up to the Seward Peninsula and through much of the interior portions of the state. Getting colder as we get to the Brooks Range and areas along the Arctic coastline into the mid 30s for those locations. Down in south central Alaska, looking at temperatures dropping to right around 50 degrees for most locations, a little bit colder in the Copper River Basin, down to 43 degrees for Glen Allen. And then down in the Panhandle, we are going to see temperatures dropping into the lower 50s. So look for Monday afternoon temperatures going back up into right around 60 degrees for the Panhandle area, right around 60 for much of south central Alaska as well, 64 for Kodiak City. As we look up into the interior portions of the state, right around 60 degrees. Fairbanks a little bit warmer, getting up to 63 degrees. Then staying around 60 through much of the western portions of the interior, down into much of southwest Alaska as well. Seward Peninsula, northern side going to be in the 40s. Southern side in the 50s, with Gamble getting up to 47 degrees. Up along the Arctic coastline, lower 40s are expected for most locations. And then finally down in the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, lower to mid 50s for most locations, with 56 expected high for St. Paul. Low temperatures for Tuesday morning, staying out over the Aleutians, in the 40s for most locations, in the 50s as we get by the Alaska Peninsula, right around 50 for the Bristol Bay area, in the mid to upper 40s for southwest Alaska for the YK Delta, extending into the western interior through much of the central and eastern interior as well. Lower to mid 40s for the Seward Peninsula, and mid 30s for much of the Arctic coastline. Down in the south central area, we are going to see temperatures in the upper 40s. Anchorage going to be a little bit warmer there at 52 degrees, 53 for Kodiak, and then down around 50 degrees for the Panhandle area, warmer as we get further to the south in the Panhandle. And then for Tuesday afternoon, temperatures jumping back up to around 60 degrees for southern locations of the Panhandle, a little bit cooler, mid 50s to upper 50s for much of the northern locations of the Panhandle, right around 60 degrees throughout south central Alaska, as well as into the central and eastern portions of the interior. Starting to get colder as we get closer towards the west coast, however. Lower 50s expected along much of the west coast, with 40s along the very western tips of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island, into the 40s for the Arctic coastline, down around 50 degrees for the Aleutian Islands, a little bit warmer for the Alaska Peninsula, dropping down to the are getting up to the mid to upper 50s in those locations.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather for Monday morning. Starting out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread MVFR conditions are expected with some occasional areas of IFR. Then MVFR and IFR conditions scattered throughout much of the southern mainland with MVFR through much of the interior. Then MVFR and IFR as we get up along the Arctic coastline. Down in the Panhandle area, expecting primarily IFR conditions with some areas of MVFR as we get further to the south. Then on Monday afternoon, MVFR and IFR for the Panhandle, as well as some MVFR throughout the Gulf of Alaska. Then primarily MVFR through South Central with some areas of IFR up in the mountains. Down in Southwest Alaska, MVFR conditions that will also extend up into the interior. And then IFR conditions primarily along the North Slope. Down the west coast of the state, a mixture of MVFR with some areas of IFR down by the southwestern portions of the state. And then MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutians. As we move into Tuesday morning, primarily MVFR for central and western locations of the Bering and Aleutian Islands, and then IFR as we get to eastern locations and into southwest Alaska. Starting to see a mixture of MVFR and IFR down through the remainder of the southern mainland, including south central Alaska, and that's going to extend up into the interior as well. Then primarily MVFR as we move up into the Brooks Range and IFR all along the North Slope. Down in the Panhandle area, we're also going to see primarily IFR conditions. For Tuesday afternoon, continuing to see primarily IFR for the Panhandle area, mixture of MVFR and IFR for South Central Alaska, primarily MVFR for Southwest Alaska, and for the interior, much of the West Coast as well. Northern Sound area is going to see some IFR conditions, however, and then IFR throughout the North Slope. Down in the Bering Sea, primarily MVFR conditions, but for the Aleutians, primarily IFR conditions are expected on Tuesday afternoon. For the passes, AKwx will start off MVFR and stay that way through the day. However, there will be IFR conditions north of the Brooks Range. That's going to be true for Adigan Pass as well, MVFR throughout the day with IFR conditions along the North Slope. For Lake Clark and Merrill, both should be IFR throughout the day on Monday. Rainy Pass will be MVFR throughout the day. Windy will start off IFR, then improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Isabel Pass will start off IFR, improving to MVFR in the afternoon. And Mentasta should stay VFR throughout the day Monday. Tenita Pass should be MVFR throughout the day. And Portage Pass should also be MVFR throughout the day. As you move down to Chilkoot and White, starting off IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. For freezing levels, surface freezing line through the Brooks Range, but we do have some areas above 2,000 feet just off the Arctic coastline, continuing to increase with height till we get to see 6,000 feet for much of mainland Alaska, down into the Aleutians as well. And then an area of warmer air coming in towards the Panhandle area, up to as high as 14,000 feet over the southern portions of the Panhandle. For our icing out over much of the southern mainland, we're going to see some considerable moderate with above 8,000 feet expected, and then becoming 8,000 feet with the isolated moderate through much of the interior and west coast of the state. Above 7,000 feet is expected by the western Aleutian Islands. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet getting up to as high as 170 knots out of the southwesterly direction, moving in over the Yakutat area. And that core of stronger winds is going to stay out over the northern Gulf, just to the south of Kodiak Island as it stretches down into the North Pacific. Out over the central portions of the Bering Sea, northerly winds 65 knots there. Northern portions of the state should be pretty light. And then out by the western Aleutian Islands, areas out of a westerly direction, around 50 knots. For 9,000 feet, our main low is still anchored out over southwest Alaska, with bringing northerly winds to much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, strongest as we get by the Alaska Peninsula, up to as high as 55 knots, and that's going to extend out over Kodiak Island as well, dropping down to 35 to 40 for areas around the Pribilof Islands, down into the central and eastern Aleutians. Out over the Gulf of Alaska, seeing the strongest winds out of the southwest 90 knots, but should stay away from land areas. However, for the Panhandle area, we're still going to see some stronger winds, 60 to 70 knots expected. Southern mainland out of the southwest, around 45 knots. And then becoming easterly as we get into the northern portions of the interior at around 40 knots. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, continuing to see our low out over southwest Alaska, bringing easterly winds out over the northern interior, 25 knots expected, extending out over the Seward Peninsula as well. Along the Arctic coastline, 40 knots out of that easterly direction. Then 35 knots as we move into the central portions of the Bering Sea, down through the central and eastern Aleutian Islands as well. Strongest winds going to be in the Gulf of Alaska and around Kodiak Island, around 55 knots out of a west to southwest direction, and 45 knots out over the Panhandle. For our turbulence all along the North Gulf Coast into East Alaska and for the Alaska Peninsula, below 4,000 feet out west, 6,000 feet to the east.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view, and with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
This is an emergency. Please walk to the nearest exit. Go to the stair tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, we have a roof, and so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Navigational waters are still sea ice free and are expected to be so through September. However, there is some light northeasterly winds that may push some of the leading edge of the ice edge a little bit to the southwest, but again, those navigational waters are expected to remain sea ice free. Moving down to southeast, we'll start off with Monday in the inside waters. Southerly winds 25 to 30 knots, with gusts up to 50 knots as we get further to the north. Seas 5 to 7 feet, highest in the north in Lynn Canal area. Out over the Gulf, west to southwest winds 25 knots are expected. Seas 10 to 13 feet, highest as we get further to the north. Then as we move into Tuesday in the inside waters, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming northwesterly 20 knots as we move further to the south. Out over the Gulf, westerly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected, seas 11 to 12 feet. Out over south central Alaska on Monday, out over the Gulf, southwesterly winds 35 knots for the most part, weaker as we get further to the east, 25 knots there. Seas as high as 24 feet over those Gulf waters. In Prince William Sound, southerly winds 30 feet with seas 6 feet. In Cook Inlet area, southerly winds 35 knots, seas up to as high as 14 feet in the southern portions of Cook Inlet. And then west of the Barren Islands, southwesterly winds 40 knots expected, seas up to as high as 16 feet. Then on Tuesday, winds dropping down quite a bit throughout the area. In the Cook Inlet area, south to southwest winds 15 knots expected. Around the Barren Islands, westerly winds 20 knots expected, seas as high as 10 feet east of the Barren Islands. Then out over the northern portions of the Gulf, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Prince William Sound, southerly winds 10 knots expected. For Monday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, all southwesterly winds 30 knots in southern locations, and then getting to 35 knots through the northern locations, including Bristol Bay, and 40 knots out of that southwesterly direction through Shelikof Strait. Seas as high as 23 feet, highest to the east of Kodiak Island, 11 to 15 feet on the Bering side. On Tuesday, flow becoming more due westerly, 20 to 25 knots, weakest again as we get further out to the west. Seas on the Pacific side, 11 to 14 feet, and then on the Bering side, 8 feet. For Monday for the Aleutian Islands, westerly winds for the most part, 20 to 30 knots, strongest as we get by the eastern Aleutian Islands. Seas as high as 15 feet on the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutians. Moving into Tuesday, continuing to see westerly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected. Seas around 7 to 8 feet for most locations. By the central Aleutian Islands, a little bit weaker there, as low as 5 feet on the Pacific side. Down the west coast of the state, primarily northerly winds, especially up further to the north, 25 to 35 knots, strongest by St. Lawrence Island, becoming more westerly south of Nunavik Island, 30 knots there, and then by the Pribilof Islands, northwesterly winds, 25 knots. Seas around 8 to 11 feet all along the west coast until you get into Norton Sound, a little bit weaker there, around 5 feet. On Tuesday, west to northwest winds are expected, 20 to 25 knots along the coastline, and then by St. Matthew Island and by the Pribilof Islands, around 15 knots is expected. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 30 knots, becoming northeasterly along the northwestern portions of the state, 25 to as high as 35 knots by Point Hope, and then northerly winds 30 to 35 knots through the strait. Seas as high as 10 to 11 feet as we move towards the Bering Strait area, 7 to 9 feet along the Arctic coast. Then on Tuesday, along the Arctic coastline, northeasterly winds 20 knots are expected, getting up to as high as 25 knots down the west coast of the state and becoming northwesterly through the Bering Strait. Seas 7 to 8 feet along the west coast, 4 to 6 feet along the Arctic coast. For our weather for the remainder of the night, the remnants of old Typhoon Bavi have moved into the southwestern portions of the state. Still pretty strong, 972 millibars, but weaker from what we are seeing today. Some of those winds will come down somewhat, but still some strong winds, especially on the south side of that low, moving through the Bristol Bay area, Alaska Peninsula area, and into south central Alaska as well. Going to see widespread rain through the southern mainland, down into the Alaska Peninsula, and out over the Panhandle area as that front starts to make its way through the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska. Going to see some showers through the interior portions of the state and up along the Arctic coastline, and some showers down through the Bering Strait west coast and into the Aleutian Islands. Then for Monday, our low is going to continue to weaken as it pushes closer towards the interior part of the state, but widespread rain is still expected through southwest Alaska, south central Alaska, down into the Panhandle and for the Alaska Peninsula. Then some lighter showers up in the interior Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, and some showers throughout the Bering Sea down into the Aleutians as well. And finally, on Tuesday, the low continued to weaken over the interior, but still rain throughout all of mainland Alaska, down the west coast through the Panhandle, Bering Sea, and Aleutian Islands.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.